Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku gained the power of a Titan in Attack on Titan's world. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Muzidafu tasted of rain and exhaust fumes, a familiar cocktail that clung to the back of Izuku Midoriya's throat. He stood perched on the edge of a 5-story building, the faint, emerald lightning of One for All, full cowling crackling around him like a second skin. At 5%, the power was a comfortable thrum, a constant companion that felt as natural as his own heartbeat. Below, the afternoon crowds flowed like a river of humanity, blissfully unaware of the potential dangers that lurked in every shadow. It was a peaceful patrol. Almost boring. Peace is good, he thought, his analytical mind kicking into gear as he scanned the streets. He adjusted the cowl of his gamma costume, the metal plates of his iron soles cool against his ankles. Boredom means people are safe. All Might always said that a hero's job is to make themselves obsolete through peace. But still, his gaze drifted to a reflection in a skyscraper window. He saw the determined set of his jaw, the wild shock of green-black hair, and the faint, crisscrossing scars on his arms, testaments to a power he was still struggling to master. He was Deku, the successor to the symbol of peace. But he was still just a student, a hero in training with a universe of expectation resting on his shoulders. The first sign of trouble wasn't an explosion or a scream, but a strange silence. It was a pocket of unnatural quiet that swallowed the city's hum. People on the street below stopped, looking around in confusion. Then, the air began to shimmer, distorting like a heat haze on a summer road. What kind of quirk? Deku muttered, his eyes narrowing. His hero notebook was back at the dorms, but his mind was already flipping through its mental pages, cataloging possibilities. Spatial manipulation? Light refraction? A large-scale illusion? The shimmer coalesced into a sphere of swirling, violet-black energy in the middle of a busy intersection. It didn't radiate heat or cold, but a profound wrongness. The asphalt around its edge began to fray, peeling away into the void like threads from old cloth. A car parked too close was erased from existence, not violently, but simply, gone. Panic erupted. The river of people became a stampede, a frantic surge away from the anomaly. Everyone, get back! Evacuate calmly! Deku yelled, his voice amplified by years of training, but it was drowned out by the rising tide of fear. He leaped from the rooftop, the wind whistling past his ears. He landed with a soft thud, the soles of his boots absorbing the impact. The villain stood at the epicenter of the chaos, a man in a tattered trench coat with a manic grin plastered across his face. His hands were outstretched, fingers splayed, and the void pulsed in time with his wild laughter. The world is a flaw. A mistake. Let the nothingness correct it. Let it all be undone. A nihilist villain. Quirk appears to be some form of localized reality erasure or a portal to an empty dimension. Deku analyzed, his body already moving. He had to get the civilians clear. The pro-heroes would be here any second, but every moment counted. He used a burst of speed, becoming a green blur, as he scooped up a man who had tripped and deposited him safely behind a concrete barrier. He went back again and again, a living shuttle weaving through the chaos. But the sphere was growing. It was now 10 meters across, its gravitational pull becoming tangible, tugging at the air, at the light, at him. It wasn't a strong pull, not yet, but it was unsettling. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 7, clutching a dropped All Might figurine. She had been separated from her parents in the crush and was standing frozen, her small face a mask of terror, staring at the swirling abyss that was slowly expanding toward her. Hey! It's okay! I'm here! Deku shouted, his heart hammering against his ribs. The villain saw her too. His grin widened. A perfect, innocent soul to be the first to return to the beautiful, silent void, he gestured, and the vortex lurched, a tendril of shimmering darkness snapping out toward the child. There was no time to think. No time for strategy or percentages. There was only the primal, burning instinct that had defined him since he was a quirkless, crying child on a playground. Save her. He pushed One for All past its safe limit. 8%. 10. 12. Pain flared in his limbs, a familiar, agonizing fire. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw the tendril of nothingness inches from the girl's terrified face. He saw the seams on her little red dress. He saw the chipped paint on the plastic All Might toy. With a final, desperate burst, he shot forward. He wrapped his arms around the girl, tucking her into his chest, and used his momentum to throw them both sideways. He twisted in midair, ensuring his body would take the brunt of the impact against the pavement. They landed hard, but she was safe. He could hear her crying against his chest, but he had miscalculated. In his desperate lunge, he hadn't accounted for the vortex's pull. The tendril had missed the girl, but it latched onto him. It felt like 1,000 icy hooks sinking into his back, into the very fabric of his existence. "No!" he gasped, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the asphalt. The pull was immense, absolute. It wasn't just physical, it felt like it was tugging at his soul. The villain cackled, a triumphant, broken sound. Deku's vision swam with violet and black. He saw the girl scramble away to safety, her parents rushing to her. He saw the distant, flashing lights of approaching pro-heroes. He saw best genist fibers already beginning to snake through the streets to restrain the villain. "Good, she's safe," was his last coherent thought. Then the world dissolved. There was a sound like a universe being torn in two, a scream of tearing reality that vibrated through his bones. Colors he had never seen bled into one another. He felt his body being stretched and compressed simultaneously, a sensation of infinite pressure and utter weightlessness. His mind, the analytical engine that was his greatest weapon, fractured under the strain. He was adrift in a sea of non-existence, a place between places, and then, with a final, violent lurch, he was spat out. Pain was the first sensation. A sharp, grinding agony in his left arm and a dull, throbbing drumbeat behind his eyes. The second was the smell, not concrete and smog, but rich, damp earth, wet grass, and the clean, crisp scent of pine. Izuku Midoriya groaned, pushing himself onto his elbows. His costume was torn, and his left arm was definitely broken, hanging at an unnatural angle. He coughed, the air surprisingly fresh and cold in his lungs. He was in a field of tall, swaying grass dotted with wildflowers. A gentle breeze rustled through a nearby forest of impossibly tall trees. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue, wider and more open than any sky he'd ever seen over a city. There were no buildings. No roads. No people. Where am I?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. He tried to activate One for All, just a flicker, to assess his injuries. The power responded sluggishly, a weak ember instead of its usual vibrant flame. The interdimensional transit, or whatever it was, had taken a massive toll on him. He managed to channel a bare 1% into his legs, enough to stagger to his feet. His head swam with vertigo. He leaned against one of the giant trees, its bark rough and unfamiliar. He fumbled for the comms unit in his ear. Static. He pulled out the support item phone Wayne Enterprises, no Detonarat, had designed for him. No signal. Of course. Okay, Midoriya. Analyze. Don't panic. His mind, though hazy, latched onto the familiar process like a lifeline. The villain's quirk was spatial. It didn't seem like an attack, more like a portal, a chaotic one. So I've been transported. Question is, where? A remote part of Japan? Another country? He pushed himself off the tree and began to walk, his broken arm cradled against his chest. He needed to find civilization, a landmark, anything. After what felt like an hour of limping through the woods, he broke through the tree line and stopped dead, his breath catching in his throat. Before him, stretching as far as he could see in either direction, was a wall. It wasn't a fence or a border barricade. It was a colossal structure of stone, at least 50 meters high, perfectly smooth and utterly seamless. It dwarfed any man-made object he had ever seen, radiating an aura of ancient, silent authority. It was a cage on a planetary scale, and nestled into the base of this impossible wall was a town. The architecture was old. European, maybe? Timber-framed houses with red-tiled roofs were packed tightly together, encircled by the same monolithic stone. A large windmill turned slowly in the breeze. There were no power lines, no cars, no signs of modern technology whatsoever. It was like he had stumbled into a history book. This isn't Japan, he realized, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This might not even be my world. He stumbled toward the town, his green costume a bizarre splash of color against the muted, earthy tones of this new, strange world. People stared as he approached the outer gate. They were dressed in simple, rustic clothing, linen shirts, leather breeches, long skirts. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They whispered to each other, pointing at his strange attire, his bright red shoes, his mangled arm. He was an alien here. An anomaly. Before he could decide what to do, how to even begin to explain himself, a sudden, blinding flash of yellow lightning erupted just outside the town. It was followed by a sound that wasn't quite thunder, a wet, organic crack that shook the very ground he stood on. The chattering crowd fell silent. A collective gasp, then a wave of pure, primal terror washed over them. Their faces went pale, their eyes wide with a horror he didn't understand. Slowly, almost majestically, a head began to rise above the 50-meter wall. Izuku's mind, which had been reeling with confusion, snapped into sharp, analytical focus. It was a face, but a grotesque parody of one. It had no skin, only exposed red muscle and sinew. Steam vented from its enormous, teeth-filled jaw. Its eyes were vacant, cavernous pits that held no intelligence, only a vast, terrifying emptiness. It was bigger than any villain he had ever faced, bigger than Gigantomachia. It was a monster from a nightmare. A gigantification quirk? His brain supplied automatically, trying to fit this impossibility into a familiar framework. But the scale, the biology, it's all wrong. There's no skin. How is it protecting its musculature? How is it regulating its body temperature? The steam, perhaps that's a factor. The colossal head looked down upon the town, a god of destruction surveying its altar. Then, a massive, skinless foot swung forward, kicking the outer gate. The impact was apocalyptic. Stone exploded inward, a deadly spray of shrapnel that tore through the front ranks of the town's defenders, men and women in uniforms holding what looked like primitive rifles. The shriek of twisting metal and pulverized rock was drowned out by the screams of the dying. The spell of shock that held Izuku broke. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was an attack, and there were people in danger. His own pain, his confusion, his fear, it all vanished, burned away by the singular, unwavering purpose that was the core of his being. Protect them. Get back! Run! He screamed, his voice raw. He tried to activate One for All. 5%! He grunted, but his body screamed in protest. The transit had left him depleted, his energy reserves almost empty. He could only manage a weak, flickering 2%, barely enough to give him a slight edge in speed. It wasn't enough. Not against that. He watched in horror as a second monster appeared. This one was smaller, maybe 15 meters, but its body was covered in thick, bone-like armor. It lowered its head and charged like a bull, its armored form smashing through the inner gate with unstoppable force. It was a living battering ram. Then came the others. Through the shattered gates poured dozens of humanoid creatures, ranging from 3 to 15 meters tall. They were all naked, malformed, with distended bellies and horrifying, permanent grins. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their eyes wide and unfocused. They were pure, mindless appetite. They fell upon the fleeing populace. The world dissolved into a tableau of absolute horror. Izuku saw a titan with the face of a cherubic baby snatch a screaming man from a rooftop and bite him in half. He saw a long-limbed creature scuttle like a spider after a fleeing family. He saw soldiers in green capes, wielding swords and flying through the air on some kind of gas-powered grappling gear, bravely trying to fight back, only to be swatted from the sky like flies. This wasn't a villain attack. Villains had motives, goals. This was a slaughter. An extinction event. He was powerless. For the first time since inheriting One for All, Izuku Midoriya was utterly, completely powerless. His quirk, the gift from his idol, the symbol of hope for a generation, was a sputtering candle in a hurricane of death. He was just a boy with a broken arm watching the world end. He was pushed along by the tide of fleeing refugees, a piece of debris in a torrent of despair. He saw a house crumble, a woman trapped beneath the rubble. He saw 2 children, a boy with furious, terrified eyes and a girl with a blank, shocked expression, staring at the wreckage. "Mom!" the boy screamed. Izuku's legs moved before he could think. He pushed through the crowd, his mind racing. "If I can just get enough leverage, maybe 3%. I could lift that beam." He reached the house just as 2 soldiers did. One of them, a man with blonde hair, assessed the situation with a grim face. "Hannes, take the children! Get them out of here!" "But Carla, there's no time!" "Look!" A Titan was approaching, its rictus grin stretching impossibly wide. It was the same one from the newsreels he'd seen of All Might's debut. The smiling Titan. But this was no newsreel. The smell of blood and dust was thick in the air. The soldier named Hannes froze, his sword half-drawn, his face a mask of abject fear. He couldn't do it. He turned, scooped up the 2 protesting children, and ran. Izuku stood there, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He saw the woman, Carla, look at her children being carried away. He saw the relief, the love, and the resignation in her eyes. He saw her mouth the words, "Be safe." Then the Titan reached the house. It ignored him, its eyes fixed on the trapped woman. Its giant hand reached down, brushing away the rubble as if it were dust. It wrapped its fingers around her torso. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bones. The woman screamed. The Titan lifted her to its mouth, and then it bit down. The world went red. Izuku couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The sight, the sound, the sheer, visceral finality of it, broke something inside him. In his world, heroes always arrived. Maybe not always in time, but they came. They fought. They saved people. Here, there were no heroes. There were only monsters and their victims. The wave of despair that washed over him was so absolute, so crushing, that his knees buckled. He fell to the ground, heedless of the chaos around him. "I couldn't save her. I couldn't save anyone. What good is this power? What good am I, if I can't do anything?" He was jostled by the fleeing crowds. He scrambled into a narrow alleyway to escape being trampled, his body shaking uncontrollably. He leaned against a brick wall, sliding down to sit in the filth and debris, his mind a maelstrom of horror and self-loathing. He had failed. That's when he heard the groan. It was faint, a whisper of pain from deeper in the alley. Izuku's head snapped up. His instincts, buried but not broken, took over. Someone was hurt. He pushed himself up, his broken arm screaming in protest, and limped further into the shadows. Lying in a pool of his own blood was one of the soldiers he'd seen fighting. He wore the green cape with the strange insignia, 2 wings, one white, one blue, the wings of freedom. He had been crushed by falling debris. His legs were mangled, and a piece of shrapnel was embedded in his side. He was dying. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were surprisingly clear, filled with a desperate intensity. He looked at Izuku, at his strange, colorful costume, at the tear tracks on his dirt-stained face. "You're not from here," the soldier rasped, coughing up a spray of blood. Izuku could only shake his head, speechless. The soldier seemed to find some hidden reserve of strength. He fumbled inside his jacket, his hand trembling, and pulled out a small, wooden case. He clicked it open. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a glass syringe filled with a shimmering, golden fluid. You have the look," the man choked out, his eyes boring into Izuku's. "I've seen it before. In him. In Commander Irwin. The look of someone who would burn themselves to ash to light the way for others." Izuku knelt beside him. "What is that? Can it help you? I can try to carry you." The man let out a wet, rattling laugh. "No, it's too late for me. But it can't die with me. The power. Marley can't get it back. Not now." He grabbed Izuku's wrist with surprising strength. His grip was like iron. "Listen to me. There's no time. This world, it's not what you think. Humanity isn't just inside these walls. There's a whole world out there, and they hate us. They fear us. They turned us into these monsters." His words were a feverish, desperate ramble, but his eyes were sane. Insanely sane. "This," he said, thrusting the case into Izuku's hands, is the only way to fight them. To be free. It will turn you into one of them. A Titan. But you can control it. You can fight for us. For humanity. Izuku stared at the syringe, then back at the man. Turn into one of those things? The idea was repulsive, terrifying. Why me? Izuku whispered. I couldn't do anything. I'm useless. The dying soldier's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. I saw your eyes when that woman, you weren't looking at the monster with hatred. You were looking at her with sorrow. You don't have the eyes of a soldier. You have the eyes of a protector. A hero. He coughed again, his body convulsing. That's what this power needs. Not a soldier consumed by vengeance, but something new. He pulled the syringe from the case. The needle glinted in the dim light. Outside the alley, the sounds of destruction raged on. You have to. If they find you, if a mindless Titan eats you, the power will be lost, or worse, returned to a random subject. You are the only hope. I am the holder of the attack Titan, the one that has always fought for freedom. The man gasped, his life fading fast. He grabbed Izuku's arm, the one that wasn't broken, and plunged the needle into his bicep. The fluid entered his system like a bolt of lightning. It was fire and ice, 1,000 volts of pure, biological energy rewriting his very DNA. Izuku cried out, his muscles seizing. His vision blurred. The soldier used his last ounce of strength to pull Izuku closer, his voice a ragged whisper against his ear. It's done. Now, you have to eat me. It's the only way to complete the transfer, to inherit everything. What? No! I can't! Izuku yelled, trying to pull away, but his body was no longer his own. The serum was working, hijacking his nervous system. The man smiled, a sad, bloody affair. Don't let my memories of hate consume you. Take our will, our dream of freedom, and forge your own path. Find the basement. Tell them Grisha was right. His eyes fixed on a point beyond Izuku, a look of profound finality on his face. Keep moving forward. For them. His grip went slack. His eyes glazed over. He was gone, and then the change began. A bolt of ethereal yellow lightning crashed down from the sky, striking the alley with impossible precision. It didn't burn, it transformed. Izuku screamed as his bones snapped and reformed, elongating at a horrifying rate. His skin stretched taut, then tore as new muscle tissue erupted from within. Heat, an infernal, biological furnace, billowed from his body in clouds of steam. His consciousness, his very sense of self, was being drowned in a tidal wave of alien instinct and fragmented memories. A young girl with blonde hair, crying by a riverbank. A man with round glasses, looking at the sea in wonder. A sterile medical room. Strange, metal birds soaring through the sky. The taste of salt water. The overwhelming, burning desire for freedom. The world swam back into focus. He was high up, looking down on the alley. His body felt immense, powerful, but clumsy. Alien. He looked at his hands. They were huge, 5-fingered, but somehow not quite right. He was a 15-meter giant, trapped in a narrow stone canyon. Below him lay the body of the soldier who had done this to him. And a new, terrible instinct rose up from the depths of his new form. It was not hunger for food, but a deeper, more primal craving, a need to consume. To inherit. No, I won't! Izuku's human mind screamed from the cage of his new flesh. But he was a passenger. His Titan body moved with a will of its own, driven by the biological imperative of the power of the Titans. It knelt, its massive head lowering. It reached down, its huge fingers surprisingly gentle as they picked up the small, broken form of the former attack Titan. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't block out the sensation. The transfer was complete. Another explosion of memories, sharper this time, flooded his mind. The name Aaron Kruger. The face of Grisha Yeager. A mission. A purpose. It was too much. The foreign memories, the trauma of the day, the horror of his own actions. It was a psychic cataclysm that his mind couldn't withstand. His control, tenuous as it was, snapped. The Titan form he inhabited staggered, its massive legs buckling. It crashed against the alley wall, shaking the foundations of the nearby buildings, before slumping to the ground. A wave of heat washed over him, and his world went dark. He awoke to the gentle rocking of a boat and the sound of quiet sobbing. He was lying on a hard wooden deck, a rough wool blanket draped over his naked, shivering body. The air smelled of river water and sweat and fear. He was weak, every muscle aching as if he'd pushed one for all to 100% a dozen times over. He slowly sat up, his head throbbing. He was on a crowded refugee barge, making its slow way up a river, away from the smoke-choked ruins of the town. Around him were the survivors, their faces hollow, their eyes empty shells of shock and grief. A garrison soldier noticed he was awake, and handed him a water skin. "You're lucky we found you, kid. Found you passed out in an alley. Thought you were dead. You're the second one we found like that today." Izuku drank greedily, the cool water a balm to his raw throat. His mind was a chaotic jumble. His own memories were intertwined with the fragmented lives of his predecessors. Kruger. Grisha, the man in the alley. It was a dizzying, nauseating mess. Then he saw them, sitting just a few feet away. The two children from the destroyed house. The boy was staring straight ahead, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes burned with a fire so intense it seemed impossible for a child to possess. The girl sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her expression still terrifyingly blank. An older boy with blonde hair sat with them, trying and failing to offer some comfort. Izuku heard the boy, Eren, speak, his voice low and trembling with a rage that was ancient and absolute. "I'm going to destroy them," he vowed, to the open air, to himself, to the world. "Every last one of those animals that's on this earth. I'll wipe them all out." Izuku looked down at his own hands. They were human again, but he could feel it, coiled deep within his marrow, a terrifying, alien power. He had become one of the monsters that had caused all this suffering. Eren's vow echoed in the silence of the barge, a promise of vengeance. In that moment, watching the boy whose mother he had failed to save, Izuku Midoriya made his own, silent vow. It was not one of hatred or destruction. It was the same promise he had made to himself 100 times before, in a different world, a world with heroes. But here, in this new, brutal reality, the words carried a weight he had never imagined. "I will save them," he thought, the inherited will of the attack titan resonating with his own heroic soul. "I will save everyone." He didn't know how. He didn't know if it was even possible. But as the barge carried him deeper into the heart of a world without heroes, Izuku knew one thing for certain. He had to try. He would become their symbol. Not of vengeance, but of hope. The world returned to Izuku Midoriya in pieces. First came the cold, a damp chill that seemed to seep into his bones from the rough, swaying wood beneath him. Then sound, a symphony of human misery, the low, shuddering sobs of a woman nearby, the whimpering of a lost child, and the rhythmic creak of the barge as it cut through the dark, sluggish water. The air was thick with the smells of the river, of unwashed bodies, and the acrid tang of distant smoke that clung to the back of his throat, the funeral pyre of a city named Shiganshina. He pushed himself up, his muscles protesting with a deep, cellular exhaustion that went beyond simple fatigue. A coarse wool blanket, smelling faintly of mildew, was draped over his shoulders. He was naked beneath it, his gamma costume gone. Vanished. Like his home. Like his world. A garrison soldier, a man whose face was etched with weary lines that made him look 20 years older than he probably was, noticed his movement. He approached, his armor clinking softly. "Easy there, son. You've been out for hours." He offered Izuku a water skin. "Found you in an alleyway, passed out cold. No injuries, just gone. You're the second one we found like that today." Izuku took the water skin with a trembling hand, the simple leather feeling alien and heavy. The water was cool and tasted of the river, but it was the most real thing he'd felt since waking. As he drank, his mind, his greatest asset, tried to piece together the shattered fragments of the last few hours. The vortex. The fall of the wall. Carla Jaeger's death. The dying soldier. The syringe. The lightning. The transformation. And the memories. They weren't his own. A sterile room, a needle-piercing skin, a man with glasses saying, "For Eldia's restoration, you must master the 9 titans." The taste of salt on the wind, a vast, endless expanse of blue water that terrified and thrilled him. The sea, a name, whispered with reverence and fear, Emer Fritz. He flinched, pressing the heels of his palms into his eyes. It was too much. A lifetime, several lifetimes, of experiences, emotions, and knowledge were trying to cram themselves into the mind of a 16-year-old boy. It was a cacophony of ghosts, and he was their unwilling host. He was Izuku Midoriya, but he was also something else. Someone else. A legacy of violence and a desperate struggle for freedom had been force-fed into his soul. The soldier seemed to mistake his distress for simple shock. "We all saw things no one should ever have to see," he said, his voice flat with resignation. "Just try to rest. We'll be in the Karen's district soon. Safe behind Wall Rose. Safe." The word felt like a joke. Izuku's gaze drifted across the crowded deck. He saw faces hollowed out by grief, bodies slumped in exhaustion. This was the human cost of the attack. And then, his eyes landed on them, huddled together against the gunwale, a trio of children who were the focal point of the day's tragedy. The boy, Eren Yeager, was staring into the darkness, his small frame rigid with a tension that was terrifying to behold. His eyes, a vibrant teal green, were not the eyes of a child. They were burning embers of pure, unadulterated hatred. Beside him, Mikasa Ackerman watched him with a fierce, silent devotion, a red scarf wrapped around her neck like a promise. And next to her, the blond boy, Armin Arlert, was curled into a ball, his body shaking with silent sobs. Izuku watched them, a profound and heavy sorrow settling in his chest. He had been there. He had seen their mother die. And he had been powerless to stop it. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on him, threatening to suffocate him. In his world, a hero would have saved her. An All Might, an Endeavor, even a Mirio, would have found a way. But he had failed. It was then that Eren spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying an unnerving intensity that cut through the low hum of despair on the barge. It was a vow spoken to the uncaring night sky, a declaration of war against the universe itself. "I'm going to destroy them," he swore, his voice cracking with a mix of grief and fury. "Every last one of those animals that's on this earth. I'll wipe them all out." The words hung in the cold air, stark and absolute. A promise of total annihilation. Vengeance made manifest. Izuku felt a tremor run through him, but it wasn't one of agreement. He understood the rage. He felt the phantom taste of the soldier's blood in his mouth, and the inherited fury of the attacked titan, the primal scream for freedom that echoed through generations. He understood the desire to fight back, to make the monsters pay. But as he looked at Eren, and then at the weeping Armin, and the countless other broken people on the boat, he saw that vengeance was a fire that would consume everything, leaving only ash. It wouldn't bring back the dead. It wouldn't heal the wounded. It wouldn't build a safer world. He looked down at his own hands, half expecting to see them morph into the colossal, steaming appendages from the alley. They were just his hands scarred from his reckless use of one for all, but human. He could feel the new power coiled inside him, a sleeping dragon in his blood. It was a monster's power. The soldier had called it the attack titan. A tool of war, a weapon of freedom. Eren wanted to use his anger to destroy. But a hero uses his power to protect. In the quiet confines of his own shattered heart, amidst the chorus of ghosts in his head, Izuku Midoriya made his own vow. It wasn't a shout into the darkness, but a whisper to the flicker of hope he refused to let die. "I will not be a weapon of vengeance," he promised himself. "I can't bring back the people who died. But I can protect the ones who are left. I will get strong enough. I will master this curse. I will be their shield. I will save them. I will save everyone." It was the same naive, impossible promise he had made his entire life. But here, in this world drenched in blood and fear, it felt less like a dream and more like the only thing tethering him to his sanity. It was the weight of his own legacy, now laid atop the bloody inheritance of the Titans. The next 2 years were a blur of mud, hunger, and monotonous labor. The refugees from Wall Maria were herded into hastily constructed camps within the farmlands of Wall Rose. Life was a slow, grinding ordeal. The initial shock and terror of the fall gave way to a dull, persistent despair. Food was scarce, distributed in meager rations of hard bread and watery soup that never quite filled their stomachs. The native residents of Wall Rose looked upon the newcomers with resentment, seeing them as little more than mouths to feed, a drain on precious resources. For Izuku, it was a period of intense, silent observation and adaptation. He was utterly alone, a castaway in a foreign reality. Every waking moment was a reminder of what he had lost. He missed the comforting weight of his mother's katsudon, the electric thrill of training with all might, the competitive camaraderie of his classmates at UA. Here, there was no technology, no modern medicine, no quirks. No heroes. The very concept seemed like a fairy tale from a forgotten age. He, Eren, Mikasa, and Armin were lumped together by circumstance, 4 orphans from the Shiganshina district. They found a shared, unspoken solidarity in their trauma. They worked the fields together, tilling the unforgiving soil for a pittance of food. Eren's rage never cooled. It simply hardened, simmering beneath the surface, erupting in furious, passionate speeches about joining the scout regiment and reclaiming their home. Mikasa remained his shadow, her quiet strength a constant, unwavering presence. It was Armin with whom Izuku formed the closest bond. The boy's physical frailty belied a mind of incredible sharpness and curiosity. He owned a precious, forbidden book, a worn-out tome filled with descriptions of the outside world. Of vast salt pans, fields of ice, and most wondrously, the ocean. One evening, huddled together for warmth against the wall of a storage shed, Armin showed him the book. His eyes lit up as he described the sea, a body of water so large that merchants could spend their whole lives on it and not see all the salt it contained. A jolt went through Izuku. A memory, not his own, flashed behind his eyes. A man with a kind face and round glasses, Grisha Jaeger, staring out at that very ocean, a look of tearful wonder on his face. The memory was so vivid, so potent, that Izuku could almost taste the salt on his tongue. "I've seen it," Izuku whispered before he could stop himself. Armin looked at him, his blue eyes wide. "What? You can't have." "No one has," Izuku backpedaled quickly, his heart pounding. "I mean, in a dream. I have very vivid dreams, that's all. It's just, you described it so well, it felt real." Armin accepted the clumsy explanation, but the incident planted a seed of friendship. Izuku, with his insatiable need to learn and analyze, was fascinated by Armin's knowledge. He would trade part of his bread ration for a chance to read Armin's books. He absorbed the heavily censored history of this world, the official doctrine that humanity had been driven to the brink of extinction by the Titans a century ago, and had taken refuge within the 3 great walls, Maria, Rose, and Sina. His analytical mind, a hero's greatest tool, whirred back to life. He filled the tattered remains of a ledger he'd found with notes, his handwriting small and cramped. He wrote in Japanese, a secret code in a world that spoke a different tongue. Titan behavior, seemingly mindless, drawn to large concentrations of humans, do not appear to require sustenance, as they regurgitate victims. Primary energy source unknown, possibly solar? They are less active at night. Weakness is a specific spot on the nape of the neck. Why? Does this area house a central nervous system or a pilot? The term, pilot, feels right. He was treating the Titans like a new kind of villain, their existence a problem to be solved, a puzzle to be deconstructed. It was his only coping mechanism, but while his mind was occupied with analysis, his body was a prison for a secret he dared not share. The power of the attacked Titan hummed beneath his skin, a constant, low-grade fever. The inherited memories continued to surface at random, disorienting and often terrifying flashes of a brutal past. He saw the systematic oppression of his predecessors, the faces of Kruger and Grisha, their desperate fight against an unseen enemy named Marley. He felt their burning desire for freedom, a desire so powerful it was almost a physical entity. This was the weight of his legacy, to carry the hopes and hatreds of dead men. He knew he had to understand this power, to control it. To turn this curse into a hero's tool. Late at night, when the camp was shrouded in an exhausted silence, he would sneak out to the desolate fields at the edge of the territory. There, under the cold light of the moon, he would practice. He wouldn't dare a full transformation. The risk was too great. Instead, he treated it like learning to use one for all. He would sit, cross-legged in the dirt, and focus inward. He'd reach for the strange, electric feeling that signaled the path to his Titan form. He'd pour his will into it, trying to manifest a small piece of the power. The first time he succeeded, it was an accident. He'd cut his hand badly on a rusty piece of farm equipment. The wound was deep, bleeding sluggishly. Back in the secluded field, he focused on the injury, on the memory of the Titan's regenerative abilities. He concentrated with all his might, and a wisp of steam hissed from the wound. He watched, breathless, as the skin knitted itself back together over the course of a minute, leaving behind only a faint pink line that quickly faded to nothing. Instantaneous healing. It was his first clue. His first controllable piece of the puzzle. Over the next 2 years, his control grew. He learned to generate localized bursts of steam from his palms, a trick that was good for little more than warming his hands on cold nights. He learned to heighten his senses, to feel the vibrations in the ground with unnatural clarity. He could never access one for all. It felt like a locked room in his own soul, its power utterly incompatible with the Titan energy that now defined his biology. But in its place was this new, terrifying, and vital power. He shared his days with the trio. He listened to Aaron's increasingly fiery declarations to join the scouts. He watched Mikasa train, her movements already possessing a deadly, economical grace. He debated strategy and history with Armin, the two of them finding an intellectual refuge in each other's company. They became his anchor, his fragile link to this new reality. He also witnessed the grim realities of their world firsthand. In the year 846, the royal government, in a desperate bid to solve the food crisis and refugee problem, ordered a massive military operation to retake Wall Maria. It was a transparently suicidal mission, sending 250,000 people, nearly a fifth of humanity's remaining population, mostly refugees, to their deaths. The news that filtered back to the camp was of a catastrophic failure. An entire generation was culled, fed to the Titans to buy the rest a little more time and a little more food. The day the news broke, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the camp. Izuku saw the hollowed-out look on the faces of people who had lost their last remaining family members in the doomed campaign. He saw Hannes, the garrison soldier who had saved Eren and Mikasa, drunk and weeping, consumed by his cowardice and his grief. That night, Izuku didn't just analyze in his journal. He wrote with a new, furious purpose. This world is broken. The system is designed to sacrifice the weak to protect the comfortable. The enemy isn't just the Titans outside the walls, but the despair and corruption within them. A hero doesn't just fight monsters. A hero fights for a better world. For everyone. His resolve, forged in the fires of Shiganshina, was now tempered into unbreakable steel by the cold realities of life within Wall Rose. He knew what he had to do. The day came in the spring of 847. A garrison commander, his face grim and his uniform immaculate, arrived at the refugee settlement. He stood on a wooden crate, his voice booming over the assembled crowd of able-bodied teenagers. "Your time as wards of the state is over," he announced. "You will now have the opportunity to repay the crown for its generosity. Recruitment for the 104th Cadet Corps is now open. You have 3 choices. Dedicate your lives to protecting the king and preserving order in the military police brigade. Dedicate your steel to the defense of all our towns as part of the garrison. Or dedicate your hearts to the hope of humanity as part of the scout regiment." A murmur went through the crowd. For most, it was a choice between a hard life and a slightly less hard life. But for Eren, it wasn't a choice at all. It was a calling. He stepped forward, his expression resolute. "I'm joining," he said, his voice clear and steady. "And I'm going to join the scout regiment." Mikasa was beside him in an instant. "If you're going, I'm going." Her tone left no room for argument. Then came Armin. He was trembling, his face pale with fear, but he took a shaky breath and stood with his friends. I'm going too," he stammered out. "I'm tired of being a burden. I have to do my part." All eyes then turned to Izuku. He had remained quiet, a strange figure they had all gotten used to over the past 2 years. the boy with the wild green-black hair who muttered to himself and always seemed to be studying something. He was strong from the farm work, but his demeanor was gentle, almost scholarly. He didn't seem like a fighter. Eren looked at him, a challenge in his eyes. "What about you, Izuku? You gonna stay here until the fields for the rest of your life?" Izuku met his gaze. There was no hesitation. No fear. Only a calm, quiet certainty that had settled in his heart long ago. He stepped forward, taking his place beside them. His internal monologue was a checklist, a hero's logical progression. Objective: save as many people as possible. Obstacle: the Titans. Current knowledge: insufficient. The garrison maintains the status quo. The military police protects the wealthy elite. Only one branch of the military actively seeks to understand and defeat the primary threat. The scout regiment is the only logical choice. It is the front line, and the front line is where a hero needs to be. He looked at the commander. "I'm enlisting," he said, his voice firm. "I will dedicate my heart to the scout regiment." The commander grunted, unimpressed. "Another suicidal fool. Fine. Welcome to the army, maggots." Later that evening, as they packed the few meager belongings they owned, Eren approached him. The fiery anger in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity. "I don't get you, Izuku," he said, sitting on the edge of his cot. "You don't talk about revenge. You don't seem to hate the Titans like I do. So why the scouts? Why choose the path with the shortest life expectancy?" Izuku finished tying his bedroll, his movements precise and deliberate. He thought of All Might's smiling face, of Uraraka's determination, of Ada's unwavering integrity. He thought of the ghosts in his head, of Kruger and Grisha, and their desperate, century-long struggle. He felt the weight of both legacies settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle. He turned to face Eren, and for the first time, he let the full, unshakable force of his heroic spirit show in his eyes. "Because in every world, Eren," he said, his voice soft but resonant with conviction, "there are people who need saving. For me, that's always been enough." Eren stared at him, unable to comprehend the simple, profound answer. It was an ideology so fundamentally different from his own, yet he couldn't deny the strength behind it. He just nodded, a silent, grudging respect passing between them, as they stood on the precipice of their new lives, four orphans bound by tragedy and choice. Izuku felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't quite hope, not yet, but it was a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a lost boy from another world. He was a soldier in training, a secret weapon, and a hero with a promise to keep. The path ahead was drenched in blood and uncertainty, but for the first time in 2 years, he was no longer just surviving. He was moving forward. The air of the 104th Training Corps grounds was thick with the scent of pine, sweat, and fear. It was a cocktail Izuku Midoriya was becoming intimately familiar with. Standing ramrod straight in a line of other terrified teenagers, he watched as Commandant Keats Shadi's prowled before them like a starved wolf inspecting a pen of sheep. The man was a monolith of intimidation, his bald head gleaming under the harsh sun, his face a permanent mask of thunderous rage. His eyes boring into each recruit as if searching for the weakest point to shatter their spirit. This was the infamous culling, the rite of passage designed to break them down before they could be built back up into soldiers. Izuku had seen this kind of psychological pressure before, from teachers like Aizawa, but Shadi's was different. Aizawa's cruelty was a tool for growth. Shadi's felt like a force of nature, an erosion of the soul. "What do they call you, maggot?" Shadi's bellowed, his face inches from a trembling Armin Arlert. "Armin Arlert, from Shiganshina, sir!" Armin squeaked, his salute faltering. "Is that so?" Shadi sneered. "A noble name for fodder! Your parents fed you to the worms. What is your purpose here? To contribute to humanity's victory, sir! How wonderful! You'll be excellent Titan fodder! Row 3, about face. Feed the pigs, Arlert!" As Armin scurried away, humiliated but intact, Izuku's mind was already working, his fears secondary to his analysis. He's not breaking them for the sake of it. He's looking for a specific reaction. Armin's answer was idealistic but showed conviction. He passed. He's testing their resolve, searching for the core reason each of us is here. Those without a strong enough why will be the first to break in a real battle. Shotties moved down the line, his verbal onslaught a precise, brutal instrument. He tore into Gene Kirstein for his dream of joining the military police, calling him a pampered coward. He mocked Connie Springer's small stature and hometown. Then, he stopped in front of Aaron. The confrontation was immediate and electric. Aaron's burning hatred met Shotties' cold fury like flint striking steel. When Shotties demanded to know who he was, Aaron's response was a roar of defiance. Aaron Yeager, from Shiganshina, a survivor of that hell. Shotties mused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. And why have you come crawling back to it? To join the scout regiment and slaughter every last Titan? Aaron declared, his voice ringing with conviction. Shotties stared him down for a long, tense moment. Izuka held his breath. Then, the commandant simply grunted. We'll see. He moved on. He had found a will he couldn't easily break, and for now, that was enough. Finally, the commandant's shadow fell over Izuku. He felt the man's gaze sweep over him, taking in the shock of untamable green hair, the sprinkle of freckles, the network of faint, silvery scars that crisscrossed his arms. And what fresh hell coughed you up? Shotties barked, his voice like grinding stone. You have the eyes of a thinker and the arms of a fool who's lost a fight with a nest of razor wire. Izuku's salute was crisp, his form perfect. He'd practiced it in his mind 100 times. Izuku Midoriya, from Shiganshina, sir, another one. Shotties muttered. He leaned in, his breath smelling of stale rations. Look at you. You don't have the dead eyes of a killer like Yeager, or the pampered arrogance of Kirstein. You look like you're about to apologize for the air you breathe. Why are you here, Midoriya? To write a sad poem about our glorious demise? Izuku met the commandant's gaze without flinching. His fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach, but his purpose was a shield against it. He gave the only answer he could, the truth that was the bedrock of his very being. To learn how to save as many people as I possibly can, sir. The answer was so earnest, so utterly devoid of the vengeance or self-interest Shotties had heard all day, that it actually gave the man pause. He stared at Izuku, his eyes narrowing, searching for a hint of deception. He found none. Only a strange, unwavering sincerity. Save people? Shotties finally grunted, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sneer. You're in the wrong business, son. We don't save people here. We feed the meat grinder so it doesn't stall. We'll see how long that idealism lasts when your friend is being pulled apart in front of you. He straightened up. You're dismissed. All of you. Welcome to hell. As the commandant stalked away, Izuku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had survived day one. But as he would soon learn, words were the least of the torments this place had to offer. The 3D maneuver gear was a symphony of leather straps, steel cables, and gas-powered machinery that Izuku found both fascinating and utterly impossible to master. In theory it was simple. Gas propulsion provided lift and speed, while grappling hooks anchored to a target, allowing the user to swing through the air like a pendulum. It required perfect balance, spatial awareness, and an almost instinctual understanding of physics and momentum. For Izuku, it was a nightmare. His first attempt at the balance aptitude test was a disaster. Strapped into the harness, suspended by 2 wires, he was supposed to simply remain upright. But his center of gravity felt all wrong. He was used to channeling one for all through his feet, grounding himself, creating a stable base. The 3DMG required the opposite, a fluid, constantly shifting core. He wobbled, flailed his arms wildly, and then promptly flipped upside down, swinging like a hooked fish, much to the amusement of the other cadets. Midoriya! What is that pathetic display? Shotties' voice boomed from the observation tower. Are you trying to impersonate a drying slab of meat? Aaron, fueled by raw determination, managed to stay upright for a few shaky seconds before face-planting. Mikasa, as expected, was a natural. She found her balance immediately, standing perfectly still with an effortless grace that seemed to defy gravity. She was the benchmark, the picture of perfection. Day after day, Izuku failed. He spent more time crashing into training dummies and dangling helplessly from the wires than he did flying. Every failure was a fresh wave of humiliation, a stark reminder of his inadequacy. This wasn't like controlling his quirk, where effort and focus yielded results. This felt alien. But Izuku Midoriya was not one to be defeated by failure. He approached the problem the only way he knew how, with relentless analysis. Each night, while the other cadets nursed their bruises and complained about shoddies, Izuku would be hunched over his journal, a stolen candle stub providing flickering light. He wasn't just writing, he was deconstructing. He sketched the 3DMG from every angle, labeling the gas canisters, the trigger mechanism, the fan blades that retracted the wires. He drew diagrams of arcs and trajectories, filling the margins with complex physics equations he barely remembered from his old world. The key isn't strength, he wrote, his pen scratching furiously. Eren has strength and he's struggling too. It's about weight distribution. The body acts as a counterweight. Mikasa isn't just balancing, she's constantly making micro-adjustments with her hips and shoulders. It's a full-body system. The gear isn't an accessory. It is the center of your body when you're in the air. I've been fighting it, trying to impose my own center of balance on it. I need to surrender to it. Become one with the flow. He started observing the other cadets with a new intensity. He watched Mikasa, not with envy, but with the keen eye of a student. He noted the way she shifted her weight a split second before firing a hook, anticipating the pull. He watched Reiner and Bertolt, their movements powerful and efficient, if less graceful than Mikasa's. He even learned from Jean, whose cautious, self-preservationist style resulted in highly controlled, energy-efficient maneuvers. He began to apply his observations. During his free time, he would hang from tree branches, trying to replicate the feeling of suspension, training his core muscles until they burned. He begged other cadets to let him study their gear, feeling the tension in the wires, the weight of the scabbards. Slowly, painfully, things began to click. He stopped fighting the gear and started working with it. His clumsy flailing turned into controlled wobbles, then into shaky balance. His first successful, sustained flight was short and clumsy, ending with him crashing into a padded post, but for him, it was a victory on par with mastering full cowling. He had taken a concept, broken it down into its fundamental parts, and rebuilt it in a way his mind could comprehend. His unique approach didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, he saw Daz and Samuel, two cadets who were perpetually on the verge of being cut, struggling with the balance test. It's hopeless, Daz groaned, hanging upside down again. My body just isn't made for this. Izuku approached them cautiously. Excuse me? Can I offer a suggestion? They looked at him, surprised. Izuku had become known as the muttering cadet, the quiet one who was always writing in his notebook. Try to stop thinking about your feet as your base, Izuku explained, pointing at the harness. Think of the point right here, at your lower back where the main straps converge, as your new center. Don't try to stand up. Try to hang from that point. Let your legs and upper body be the counterweights, like a scale. He went on, explaining his theory about micro-adjustments and anticipating the pull. Daz and Samuel listened, skepticism giving way to understanding. They tried his method. It wasn't an instant fix, but for the first time, they felt a flicker of control. They managed to stay upright, shaky but balanced, for a few precious seconds. Hey, it worked, Samuel said, a look of disbelief on his face. From then on, Izuku earned a new reputation. He was still an average trainee in the eyes of many, but to a handful of struggling cadets, he became an unlikely tutor. He was the strategist, the analyst who could see the mechanics behind the motion. He wasn't a natural genius like Mikasa, but he was a genius of effort, and in a way, that was even more inspiring. His bond with Armin deepened over textbooks and strategy maps. They would spend evenings in the mess hall, long after the others had gone to bed, poring over military history. Armin would marvel at the great generals of the past, while Izuku would deconstruct their tactics with a modern eye, pointing out logistical flaws and proposing alternate strategies. If they had used a pincer movement here instead of a full frontal assault, Izuku would mutter, sketching on a napkin, they could have minimized casualties by 40%, assuming the terrain maps were accurate. Armin would stare at him, his eyes wide with awe. How do you think of that so fast? It's just a hobby, Izuku would say, a sad smile touching his lips as he thought of his hero analysis for the future notebooks. A lifetime of work in a world that might as well have never existed. His relationship with Eren, however, was a whetstone upon which they sharpened each other's ideals. They were friends, bound by their shared origin, but they were also rivals, two opposing poles of the same desperate desire to make a difference. Their rivalry came to a head during hand-to-hand combat training. Eren fought with a ferocity that bordered on desperation. Every punch was thrown with killing intent. He was all aggression, a roaring fire that sought to consume its opponent. Izuku, even without one for all, was surprisingly formidable. 2 years of hard labor had given him a lean, wiry strength, and his analytical mind allowed him to read his opponent's movements, predicting their attacks before they were even launched. He fought like water, flowing around Eren's rage, redirecting his momentum, using joint locks and trips learned from watching Eraserhead. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to neutralize the threat. During one particularly intense sparring session, Izuku managed to get Eren in an arm lock, forcing him to the ground. Submit. Izuku grunted, applying just enough pressure. Never! Eren snarled, struggling uselessly. You fight like a coward, Izuku! Always defending, always dodging. Why don't you ever just hit me with everything you've got? Because this is training, Izuku said, his voice calm and steady. The goal isn't to hurt you. It's to practice subduing an opponent with minimal effort and risk. A real fight isn't about who's stronger. It's about who can end it the quickest and safest way possible. Safest? Eren spat, his face contorted with fury. Tell that to my mother! There is no safe way to fight a Titan. You have to be a monster to kill a monster. You have to hate them, want to tear them limb from limb. Izuku released him, his expression turning serious. I don't think so, Eren. If you let your hatred control you, you'll just be a weapon. A predictable one. You have to be smarter than them. You have to be better. Rage is a fuel, but it burns out. A desire to protect people. That's a fire that never dies. Their debate was cut short by Shadi's whistle, but the words lingered between them. They were two sides of the same coin, Eren, the avenging sword, and Izuku, the unbreakable shield. And in the brutal world they inhabited, they would need both. By the end of their 3rd year, Izuku was a completely different person from the clumsy greenhorn who had first strapped on the gear. He wasn't in the top 10. His scores were dragged down by his average marks and marksmanship and his initial, disastrous performance with the 3 DMG. But those who paid attention saw his true value. He had developed a unique, energy-efficient style of flight, using short, controlled bursts of gas and his environment to swing in precise, spider-like arcs. Commandant Shadi's, in his final evaluation, had written a single, cryptic note beside Izuku's name. Weak body, strong mind. Do not underestimate his value. Or his resolve. He had mastered the tools of this world. And just in time. The final graduation exercise was upon them. A week-long wilderness survival test in the forests near the edge of Wall Rose, a territory once thought to be clear of Titans. The air under the canopy of the giant forest was cool and damp. Izuku's squad, led by the pragmatic and ever-cynical Jean Kirstein, moved with a practiced efficiency. Their objective was simple: navigate to a rendezvous point using only a map and compass, simulating a mission beyond the walls where supplies were limited. For 2 days the exercise was grueling but uneventful. They foraged for food, purified water, and took turns on watch. A sense of camaraderie had formed, born of shared hardship. Even Jean's complaints seemed less pointed, more a part of the group's dynamic. On the 3rd day, everything went wrong. They were traversing a narrow ravine when the ground began to tremble. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding that grew closer with each passing second. Everyone, up the ravine wall! Now! Jean ordered, his face pale. They fired their hooks, scrambling up the rocky cliff face. They reached the top just as it appeared. It was an 8-meter class Titan, an abnormal. Unlike the others, it moved with a loping, quadrupedal gait, its head lolling to one side, its eyes fixed on them with an unsettling intelligence. It must have wandered in through a section of the wall that was under repair, a freak occurrence that command hadn't planned for. Their training kicked in. Connie, Marco, get a message to the instructors! The rest of us, we distract it. Remember the nape! Go! Jean yelled, taking command. They scattered, becoming a swarm of gnats around the beast. They were good. 3 years of relentless training had honed them into capable soldiers. But this was real. The air was filled with the creature's hot, foul breath. The ground shook with every step. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of calm, cold calculation. Quadrupedal stance gives it a low center of gravity. Harder to trip. Its speed is deceptive. It's targeting whoever is closest. We need to create a clear opening for an attack on the nape, but its erratic head movements make that difficult. He flew past its face, drawing its attention, allowing Mikasa to get into position for a strike. But the Titan was fast. It swiped at her, a clumsy but devastatingly powerful blow. She evaded it, but the force of the wind from its passage sent her spinning, her hook dislodging from a tree. She was falling. Jean saw it. Without a second thought, he changed his trajectory, firing a hook into the Titan's shoulder to draw its attention away from the vulnerable Mikasa. "I've got you!" he yelled. It was a brave, selfless act. It was also a fatal mistake. The Titan, ignoring the others, turned its full attention to the closest and most immediate threat. Its massive hand shot out, not to grab, but to swat. Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. He saw the trajectory of the hand. He saw Jean's eyes widen in terror, realizing his hook was still lodged, that he couldn't get away in time. He saw the faces of his friends, of everyone he had promised to save. There was no time for analysis. No time for a plan. There was only the core, unwavering instinct that had thrown him into a villain's vortex to save a little girl. Protect. A power he had kept dormant for 3 years, a monster he had learned to muzzle but never tame, answered his call. He didn't scream. He didn't roar. He simply willed it. He reached for the well of otherworldly energy within him and pulled. He was flying towards Jean, but he wasn't fast enough. So he pushed the power, not into his whole body, but into a single point of impact. His right arm. For a split second, the air around his arm shimmered with heat. A faint tracery of glowing green lines, like lightning trapped under the skin, flared into existence. His arm contorted, swelled, and was encased in a layer of steaming, crystalline green armor that looked like a cross between a Titan's hardened skin and the support gear he'd worn in his old life. It was a partial transformation, a controlled burst of monstrous power focused into a single, heroic act. He reached Jean a microsecond before the Titan's hand did. He didn't try to push Jean out of the way. Instead, he wrapped his left arm around Jean's waist, spun them both around, and met the Titan's gargantuan, swiping hand with his own armored fist. The impact was cataclysmic. Not a clang of metal, but a deep, organic crack, like a mountain breaking in two. A shockwave of superheated steam erupted from the point of contact, blasting leaves and dirt in every direction. The Titan's fingers shattered against Izuku's hardened fist. The creature let out a silent, pained roar and recoiled, its hand a mangled ruin. Izuku, his armored arm already dissolving back into steam and flesh, used their momentum to swing Jean to the safety of a high branch. The backlash of the impact was immense. His entire right side screamed in agony, and the sudden expenditure of energy left him dizzy and nauseous. He landed clumsily on another branch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The other cadets just stared, their minds unable to process what they had just seen. From their perspective, in the heat of battle, it looked like Izuku Midoriya, the quiet analyst, had met a Titan's hand with his bare fist and won. "What? How?" Jean stammered, looking from his own intact body to Izuku, who was panting heavily. "Adrenaline," Izuku gasped out, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Guess I'm stronger than I thought." The moment of shock was broken as Mikasa, having recovered, seized the opportunity. With the Titan stunned and clutching its broken hand, its nape was wide open. She sliced through it with deadly precision. The creature froze, then slowly toppled forward, its body already beginning to disintegrate into steam. Silence fell over the forest, broken only by the sound of panting and the hiss of the dissolving corpse. Everyone was looking at Izuku, a mixture of awe, confusion, and suspicion on their faces. Jean opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He had been seconds from death, and his life had been saved by an impossible act of strength from the last person he expected. But two people weren't looking at Izuku with confusion. From a high branch on the other side of the clearing, Reiner Braun and Bertolt Hoover exchanged a long, silent look. There was no awe in their eyes, only a cold, calculating recognition. They had seen the flash of light. They had felt the unnatural heat. They had seen something that didn't belong, something that reminded them of the power they and their enemies possessed. They said nothing. But in that silent, shared glance, a seed of dangerous suspicion was planted. A greenhorn cadet had just revealed a flicker of the monster he held inside, and the other monsters hidden in their ranks had taken notice. The year 850 dawned with a fragile, almost defiant sense of optimism. For the newly graduated cadets of the 104th Training Corps, the world felt manageable. They had survived 3 years of Keith Shotty's brutal tutelage. They had mastered the art of flying on threads of steel and whispers of gas. They had become soldiers, standing atop the 50-meter expanse of wall rows, looking out over the Trost district. The horrors of Shiganshina felt like a nightmare from another lifetime. Izuku Midoriya stood with his comrades, the wind whipping at the green wings of freedom cape he wore with a solemn pride he hadn't expected to feel. He was assigned to wall defense, a relatively mundane posting. It was a day of routine, of cleaning cannons and maintaining gear, a stark contrast to the thrilling, terrifying prospect of the scout expedition that awaited them. His mind, as always, was a quiet whirlwind of analysis. He surveyed the district below, his eyes tracing the layout of the streets, noting the choke points, the open squares, the optimal paths for 3DMG traversal. He wasn't just seeing a town, he was seeing a battlefield. It was a habit born of a hero's training, now honed by a soldier's grim reality. The incident in the forest during their final exercise had been officially dismissed as a fluke, a surge of hysterical strength. But the memory lingered. Jean Kirstein, whose life Izuku had saved, no longer treated him with casual disdain. There was a grudging respect in his eyes, laced with a confusion he couldn't voice. Reiner and Bertolt were even more unsettling. They were outwardly friendly, but Izuku often caught them watching him with a quiet, unnerving intensity, their gazes lingering a moment too long. He knew they suspected something, but what, he couldn't guess. He had kept his secret for 5 years. He would continue to keep it. His power was a last resort, a final, desperate card to be played only when there was no other way to save lives. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the shift in the atmosphere. It was a subtle change, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. A collective hush fell over the wall. Conversations died in mid-sentence. The birdsong that had filled the morning air ceased. Then came the lightning. It wasn't a natural storm cloud that produced it. It was a blinding, instantaneous flash of golden energy that erupted from a point just outside the main gate, in the very spot where the refugees had cowered 5 years ago. The air crackled with an otherworldly ozone, and the ground beneath their feet gave a violent, sickening lurch. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew that lightning. He had felt it in his own bones in that dark alley in Shiganshina. It was the signature of a titan transformation. A wave of steam, impossibly vast and hot, billowed upwards. And from within that cloud, a familiar, nightmare figure began to rise. The skinless face. The vacant, cavernous eyes. The jaw that could swallow a house whole. The colossal titan had returned. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the soldiers on the wall were paralyzed. It was a monster from a story, a god of destruction made flesh, and its sheer scale defied all logic, all training. But they were no longer terrified children or untested recruits. They were soldiers. "It's him!" a veteran screamed, his voice a mixture of terror and fury. "All troops, prepare for battle! This is not a drill! Target the nape! Artillery squads, fire at will!" The world exploded into disciplined capes. Cannons roared, their iron balls arcing through the air towards the creature's head. Eren Yeager, his face a mask of incandescent rage, was the first to react, launching himself off the wall with his 3DMG, a vengeful war cry tearing from his throat. "Eren!" Izuku yelled, but his friend was already gone, a green-caped bullet rocketing towards his personal devil. Izuku's mind, which had frozen in a moment of pure, primal dread, rebooted with stunning clarity. His fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in his gut, but it was overshadowed by a tidal wave of purpose. Objective: defend the wall, protect the civilians. The colossal titan is the primary threat. Its movements are slow, predictable. Its weakness is its heat and steam emissions. Getting close is the main challenge. He watched as Eren, in his rage, charged straight for the titan's face. A frontal assault is suicide, Izuku thought, his strategic brain screaming in protest. He's ignoring the steam. He'll be boiled alive before he gets close enough. As if to prove his point, the colossal titan unleashed a massive wave of superheated steam from its body. The blast was like a furnace door opening, a scorching wave that repelled the cannonballs and sent the attacking soldiers reeling. Eren was blasted backward, his gear damaged, saved only by his own quick thinking and the support of his squad. The colossal titan ignored them. It had one goal. It raised a massive, skinless arm, larger than a battleship, and swung it towards the cannons on the wall. Izuku saw it coming. He saw the soldiers in its path, frozen in terror. He saw Thomas Wagner, one of his fellow graduates, standing directly in the line of destruction. There was no time to weigh options. He fired his hooks into the stone parapet, the triggers clicking in a familiar rhythm. Gas hissed from his canisters. He wasn't aiming for the Titan. He was aiming for Thomas. He became a blur of green and steel, his unique, energy-efficient flight style allowing him to build momentum with terrifying speed. He reached Thomas a split second before the Titan's arm connected with the wall. He didn't shout a warning. He just acted. He slammed into Thomas's side, tackling him in midair. "What the Midoriya?" Thomas yelled in confusion. The world behind them exploded. The sound was deafening, a cataclysmic roar of stone and steel being pulverized into dust. The shockwave threw them through the air like discarded dolls. Izuku twisted his body, absorbing the brunt of the impact as they crashed onto the top of a nearby house, the tiles shattering beneath them. He groaned, his body screaming in protest. He had saved one. But as he looked up, he saw the catastrophic result of the attack. The outer gate of Trost, the first line of defense, had been obliterated, and the colossal titan, its purpose served, was vanishing in a colossal cloud of its own steam. A gaping hole now marred the sanctity of Wall Rose. And through that hole, the monsters began to pour in. The retreat from the wall was a desperate, chaotic scramble. The vanguard squad, led by the veterans, had been wiped out. Panic began to set in as the reality of the situation became clear. They were trapped in a city that was rapidly becoming a graveyard. Izuku found himself in a squad with Armin, their faces pale but their minds sharp. They rendezvoused with Eren, Mikasa, Connie, Sasha, and the others. They were no longer trainees. They were the front line. All cadets will resupply and then provide support for the middle guard's evacuation efforts. A garrison officer yelled over the din of screaming and collapsing buildings. Engage any titans you encounter, but your primary objective is to buy time. Now move! The city had transformed. The familiar, comforting streets were now hunting grounds. The screams of civilians were the soundtrack to their desperate flight. Izuku saw it all with a horrifying, analytical detachment. He noted the Titans' erratic movements, their varying sizes, their complete disregard for their own safety. They were a force of nature, an earthquake with teeth. His squad moved with grim efficiency, their capes fluttering behind them. They were good. They were the top of their class. But the sheer number of Titans was overwhelming. They engaged a 10-meter Titan that was blocking an evacuation route. Eren, fueled by his bottomless well of rage, went in first. He was a whirlwind of blades and fury, but in his haste, he was reckless. He overshot his attack on the nape, leaving himself exposed. The Titan's hand swiped at him, and he was sent crashing into a building, his leg mangled and broken. "Eren!" Mikasa screamed, her usual composure shattering. Before anyone else could react, another Titan, a 5-meter abnormal with bulging eyes, came scuttling around the corner. It moved with unnatural speed, its target the downed and helpless Eren. Thomas Wagner, the boy Izuku had just saved, saw the threat. With a cry of, "I'll show you what the 104th can do!" he launched himself at the abnormal. It was a brave, foolish charge. The Titan's jaw snapped open, and in a single, horrifying motion, it caught Thomas in midair. There was a sickening crunch, and he was gone. The sight broke their formation. Their morale, so high just moments before, shattered like glass. One by one, they were picked off. Mylius and Knack were swatted from the air. Mina Carolina's wire was grabbed, and she was slammed into a wall before being devoured. The disciplined soldiers of the 104th had become terrified, fleeing children. Izuku watched it happen, a cold, sickening horror rising in his throat. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. I have to do something. I have to save them. He saw Armin, frozen in shock on a rooftop, staring at the mangled remains of his friends. A bearded titan, its grin disturbingly gentle, was reaching for him. Armin! Eren roared, his face a mask of desperation. Despite his broken leg, he managed to push himself up. He couldn't use his gear. He couldn't fight. But he could still save his friend. He hobbled forward and, with a final, desperate shove, threw Armin out of the Titan's path. Eren fell, his body tumbling into the shadow of the Titan. No! Armin screamed, landing hard on the rooftop below. Izuku watched in slow motion, his heart stopping in his chest. The bearded Titan looked down at the boy at its feet. It bent over. Its giant hand scooped Eren up. No, not again! Izuku thought, the memory of Carla Jaeger's death flashing behind his eyes. Not again! The Titan lifted Eren to its mouth. Eren, in a final act of defiance, raised his arm, trying to hold the creature's jaw open. I'll kill you all! He rasped, his voice filled with blood and fury. Then, the jaws snapped shut. Eren's arm was severed at the shoulder. And he was gone. Silence. A profound, world-ending silence fell over the rooftop where Armin and Izuku stood. The sounds of the city, the screams, the chaos, all faded into a dull, distant roar. All that existed was the image of their friend, their fiery, determined, unstoppable friend, being eaten. Armin crumpled to the ground, a raw, animalistic wail of grief and despair tearing from his lungs. For Izuku, it was different. It wasn't just grief. It was failure. A catastrophic, absolute failure on a scale he had never imagined. He had promised to save everyone, and he had stood by and watched as his friends were torn apart. He had a power that could have stopped this, a secret weapon he had kept holstered out of fear and caution. And what had that caution achieved? A pile of corpses. The ghosts in his head screamed. Kruger. Grisha. The man in the alley. Their collective will, their burning desire for freedom, for a world where this didn't happen, surged through him, merging with his own heroic agony. The Attack Titan's legacy was to always move forward, to always fight for freedom. And his legacy, the legacy of Deku, was to save people. Right now, those two legacies were screaming the same thing. No more holding back. No more half measures. No more fear. He looked around. His squad was gone. Connie and Sasha had fled. Armin was catatonic with grief. And the Titans were closing in. A 4-meter was crawling up the side of the building. A 7-meter was shambling towards them from the street. They were surrounded. They were out of gas. They were going to die. No! Izuku whispered, the word a puff of steam in the cold air. He stood up. His eyes, usually so bright and full of nervous energy, were now cold and hard as emeralds. He looked at the approaching monsters, not with fear, not with rage, but with a profound, chilling resolve. He placed a hand on Armin's shoulder. Stay here. I'll handle this. Armin didn't even seem to hear him. Izuku walked to the edge of the rooftop, facing the encroaching horde. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world. He didn't need to see it. He needed to focus. He reached inward, not to the flickering, hesitant ember of power he had practiced with, but to the raging, infernal core of it. He didn't just ask for its power. He seized it. One clear, unwavering thought cut through the chaos in his mind. Not a promise. Not a vow. A statement of fact. Protect. Save them all. He raised his hand to his mouth, an instinct he didn't know he possessed. He bit down. Hard. The pain was sharp, grounding, and then the lightning came for him. A torrent of brilliant, emerald green lightning erupted from the sky, striking him with the force of a meteor. It wasn't the golden flash of the colossal or the armored titan. This was different. It was vibrant, crackling with a life force that felt less like destruction and more like creation. The rooftop exploded in a wave of thunder and steam. From the epicenter of that blast, a new form began to rise. It was a 15-meter class titan, but it was unlike any that had ever been seen before. Its body was not grotesque or malformed. It was lean and powerfully built, an anatomical marvel of corded muscle and streamlined limbs, like a perfect fusion of a champion athlete and a god of war. Its skin was a pale gray, but it was crisscrossed with intricate, glowing green patterns that pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent light, mirroring the full cowling energy he could no longer access. Its face was more defined than other titans, with a sharp jawline, a focused expression, and eyes that glowed with a fierce, intelligent emerald fire. This was not a mindless monster. This was a warrior. It threw its head back and let out a roar. It wasn't the guttural, mindless sound of a normal titan. It was a clear, sharp, defiant cry that cut through the cacophony of the battle, a hero's battle cry. It was the roar of a cymbal. The nearby titans, drawn by the sound and energy of the transformation, converged on the rooftop. The 4-meter that had been crawling up the wall was the first to reach it. It lunged, its mouth wide. The hero titan, Deku, moved. It wasn't a clumsy, lumbering motion. It was a blur of speed and precision. He sidestepped the lunge with an agility that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. His right arm, glowing with a more intense green light, swung in a perfect arc. His fist, hardened into a crystalline green material that looked like a giant gauntlet, connected with the smaller titan's head. The impact was not a fleshy squelch, but a sharp, explosive crack. The 4-meter titan's head didn't just get crushed, it disintegrated into a spray of steam and gore. The body flew backward, crashing into the street below. The 7-meter shambling from the street reached the base of the building. Deku simply leaped from the rooftop. He didn't fall, he descended, twisting his body in midair with the practiced grace of his 3DMG training. He landed in a crouch, his landing so perfectly controlled that the ground barely shook. He moved before the 7-meter could even react. He wasn't just fighting, he was analyzing, just as he always did. Target the nape. A direct punch is effective but inefficient. A kick would use my stronger leg muscles and provide a wider impact area. He spun, a low, powerful roundhouse kick that was a perfect, upscaled version of a martial arts move. His hardened shin connected with the titan's legs, shattering them like glass. As the creature fell forward, its nape was exposed. Deku brought his heel down in a devastating axe kick, severing the vital point with surgical precision. The titan collapsed, already beginning to steam. 2 down in less than 10 seconds. He stood up, his greenlit form a beacon in the ruined city. He could feel it all, the heat of his own body, the vibrations in the ground, the distant screams of the living, and the mindless intent of the dead. He could also feel the clock ticking. The inherited memories told him this form was temporary, a massive expenditure of energy that he couldn't sustain forever. He had to be efficient. He looked over at Armin, who was still huddled on the half-destroyed rooftop, now staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of reassurance, before turning his attention to the rest of the city. More titans were coming, drawn to the commotion. A 10-meter and a 12-meter were approaching from the main street. They were going after a group of garrison soldiers who were trying to evacuate a trapped family. Protect. Deku didn't run. He sprinted. He moved with a runner's form, his massive limbs pumping, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. He covered the distance in seconds, a green comet of righteous fury. He didn't charge through buildings. He vaulted over them, his movements economical and precise. He reached the soldiers just as the 12-meter was reaching for them. He didn't attack the titan directly. He put himself between the monster and the people. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and the crystalline green armor flared into existence, forming a massive, interlocking shield. Delaware! Shield! He thought, the name of the move a ghost on his human tongue. The 12-meter's fist slammed into the shield. The sound was a deafening gong, and the force of the blow sent cracks spiderwebbing through the pavement beneath Deku's feet, but the shield held. He hadn't even been moved back an inch. The soldiers stared, their mouths agape. What is that thing? One of them stammered. It's protecting us. It's like the verdant titan from the legends. Another whispered in awe. While the 12-meter was recoiling, its own fist shattered from the impact, Deku acted. He let the shield dissolve and grabbed the creature's arm. He used its own momentum against it, just as he had done with Eren in sparring, and threw the massive creature over his shoulder in a perfect judo throw. The 12-meter titan crashed into its 10-meter companion, sending them both tumbling into a pile of limbs and rubble. He didn't wait for them to recover. He leaped onto the tangled mess of bodies and stomped down on each of their napes in 2 quick, brutal motions. 4 down. He stood atop the steaming corpses, his chest heaving, steam venting from the glowing lines on his body. He scanned the district, his enhanced senses painting a grim picture. Dozens of titans, hundreds of trapped civilians. A failing defense. This titan wasn't a berserker. It wasn't a mindless engine of rage. It fought with the mind of a hero, the precision of a strategist, and the heart of a savior. In the midst of the apocalypse, a new kind of monster had been born. And for the terrified, cowering remnants of humanity in Trost, it was the first glimmer of something they had long since lost. It was the first appearance of their symbol of hope. Steam hissed from the glowing green fissures that patterned Izuku's titan body, each exhalation a cloud of expended energy. From within the steaming cockpit of flesh and bone, his human consciousness was a point of pure, searing focus in a sea of sensory overload. He could feel the thrum of every footstep in the district, hear the distant, terrified screams of civilians, and smell the coppery tang of blood on the wind. The inherited memories of the attack titan whispered strategies of guerrilla warfare and ruthless efficiency, while his own heroic instincts screamed a single, unwavering mantra: protect. Prioritize the living, minimize collateral damage. He stood atop the dissolving corpses of the 2 titans he had just dispatched, a 15-meter emerald-veined sentinel in a city of gray stone and red ruin. The garrison soldiers he had saved stared up at him, their faces a mixture of stark terror and dawning, incredulous awe. He was a monster, one of the very creatures they were trained to kill, yet he had just acted as their shield. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. "Commander," one of the soldiers stammered to his superior. "What are your orders?" The garrison commander, a grizzled man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, could only stare. He had seen abnormals before, titans that ran, or leaped, or crawled, but he had never seen one fight with tactical precision. He had never seen one protect humans. Before he could formulate an order, Izuku moved. His glowing green eyes scanned the rooftops, and he saw them, a squad of cadets, his own classmates from the 104th, trapped on a rooftop, their gas tanks empty, their expressions grim with the acceptance of their own impending deaths. Jean, Connie, Marco, and Mikasa, who was desperately trying to rally their broken spirits. A pack of 3 titans was slowly converging on their position. Izuku's purpose sharpened. He launched himself from his perch, his movements a symphony of controlled power. He didn't charge in a straight line, smashing through buildings. He moved like an expert 3DMG user, using the city itself as his equipment. He leaped, pushing off the side of a clock tower, twisted in midair to avoid a collapsing steeple, and landed with a ground-shaking but perfectly balanced thud in the square below his comrade's rooftop perch. He had placed himself directly between them and the advancing titans. "What in the world?" Jean breathed, his eyes wide. "It's another abnormal," Connie said, his voice trembling. "But, it's fighting the others." Mikasa said nothing. Her gaze was fixed on the new titan. There was something in its posture, in the focused intelligence of its glowing eyes, that was familiar. It didn't move with the mindless, instinctual hunger of the others. It moved with purpose. The 3 titans, a lanky 7-meter, a stout 10-meter, and a disproportionate 5-meter with an oversized head, charged him. Izuku didn't wait for them to reach him. He met them head-on. He sidestepped the 7-meter's clumsy grab, his hardened green fist lashing out and shattering its jaw. As it recoiled, he ducked under a swipe from the 10-meter, his other hand shooting out to grab its ankle. With a grunt that was almost audible to the humans watching, he lifted the creature off the ground and used it as a colossal, flailing club, smashing it into the 5-meter and sending both of them crashing into the side of a building. He dropped the stunned 10-meter, leaped onto its chest, and brought a hardened elbow down on its nape, the crunch of pulverized vertebrae echoing through the square. He then turned to the 7-meter, which was still clutching its broken jaw. He didn't bother with a complex maneuver. He simply drove the hardened knuckles of his right hand through its chest, grabbed its spinal column from the inside, and ripped it out through its back, severing the connection to the nape in a single, brutal, and stunningly efficient motion. From the rooftop, the cadets watched, speechless. He's killing them," Marco whispered, his voice filled with a hope that felt dangerous to even acknowledge. "He's on our side. Don't be an idiot, Marco," Jean shot back, though his voice lacked its usual cynical bite. "It's a monster. It's probably just territorial. Once it's done with them, it'll come for us." But it didn't. After dispatching the last Titan, the verdant Titan stood for a moment, steam pouring from its body. It slowly turned its head, its glowing green eyes looking directly up at them. It held their gaze for a long second, then gave a slow, deliberate nod before turning and sprinting away, heading deeper into the heart of the battle. The gesture was undeniably intelligent. Undeniably human. "Did you see that?" Connie gasped. It nodded at us. A seed of impossible hope had been planted in the ashes of their despair. A rogue element had been introduced to the equation of their extinction. As Izuku's hero Titan carved a path of disciplined destruction through Trost, another, far more chaotic force was about to be unleashed. Inside the belly of the bearded Titan, darkness was absolute. The air was hot, acidic, and filled with the stench of blood and viscera. Eren Yeager was floating in a gruesome soup of half-digested human remains, his body a canvas of unimaginable pain. His left arm was gone, sheared off at the shoulder. His left leg was a mangled ruin. He was dying. But Eren Yeager's will was not a thing that could be easily extinguished. It was a forge fire of pure, concentrated rage. As his life ebbed away, his fury coalesced. He thought of his mother. He thought of his fallen comrades. He thought of the promise he had made. "I'll kill them all," he thought, his consciousness fading. Every last one, a memory, not his own, erupted in his mind. The face of his father, Grisha, his eyes wild with a desperate urgency. A key, glinting in the dim light of a cellar. And a needle, plunging into his arm. A forgotten trauma, a buried power, awakened by the precipice of death. The bearded Titan, which had been placidly digesting its meal, suddenly froze. A pained, confused gurgle escaped its throat. Its massive stomach began to swell, distending grotesquely. A searing, golden light began to glow from within, visible even through its skin. With a wet, explosive roar, the Titan's back burst open. From the gory ruin, a new form clawed its way into the world, trailing gore and steam. It was another 15-meter Titan, but it was a stark contrast to the one Izuku now inhabited. This one was a creature of pure rage. Its hair was long and wild, its jaw unhinged in a permanent, feral snarl, revealing rows of pointed teeth. Its eyes were not intelligent. They were burning pits of green fire, lit by a singular, all-consuming purpose, destruction. This was the attack Titan in its rawest, most primal form. A berserker. A devil born of vengeance. It threw its head back and let out a roar of undiluted fury, a sound that promised nothing but death and ruin. It saw another Titan nearby and immediately charged, its movements clumsy but unstoppable. It didn't bother with weak points or strategy. It simply tore into its foe, ripping off its arm and beating it senseless with the bloody limb. It bit, it clawed, it smashed. It was not a soldier. It was an animal. A very, very effective animal. The appearance of a second rogue Titan threw the entire battlefield into confusion. The garrison soldiers, who were just beginning to process the existence of a heroic Titan, were now faced with a rampaging monster that seemed to fight other Titans but did so with such mindless savagery that it was just as terrifying. Izuku felt the shift in the battle immediately. He felt the ground tremble with the force of the new Titan's rampage. He heard its distinctive, rage-filled roar. From his vantage point on a church tower, he saw it, the snarling, long-haired Titan, tearing another monster apart with its bare hands. For a moment, his human mind reeled. Another one? How? Is it a shifter like me? Is it Eren? The thought was a wild, desperate hope. The timing, the location, It all pointed to the impossible, but there was no time for speculation. He watched as the new Titan, in its blind fury, brought a building down on top of a group of fleeing civilians. It hadn't targeted them, but its recklessness was just as deadly as malice. At that same moment, a 12-meter Titan with unnervingly long arms was closing in on a different group of civilians huddled in an alleyway. Izuku was too far to reach them in time, but the rampaging attack Titan was closer. He watched, his non-existent heart in his throat, as Eren's Titan finished its brutal kill and turned. It saw the 12-meter. It saw the cowering civilians. And with a roar it charged. It ignored the humans completely, its rage singularly focused on the other monster. It intercepted the 12-meter with a flying tackle that shattered the street, its entire being dedicated to the act of destruction. He's not targeting humans, Izuku analyzed, a wave of relief washing over him. His rage is focused solely on the other Titans. But he's a liability. His lack of control is causing massive collateral damage. He's a weapon without a wielder. Izuku knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight alongside this whirlwind of destruction. He had to manage it. He had to become its shepherd. His role on the battlefield changed. He was no longer just a frontline combatant. He became a guardian, a sheepdog herding a furious wolf. He began to shadow the attack Titan, keeping his distance but always positioning himself to mitigate the damage. When Eren's Titan threw another monster through a building, Izuku was there, using his own body and hardened arms to catch the flying debris before it could crush a nearby shelter. When Eren's wild swings threatened to topple the district's clock tower, a key strategic landmark, Izuku sprinted in, grabbed the tower, and used his immense strength to stabilize it, his feet digging deep furrows in the stone square. Their fighting styles were a study in brutal contrast, a dance of two devils with opposing philosophies. Eren was fire. He was pure, instinctual offense. He would charge into a group of 3 Titans and just start swinging, taking devastating hits that would cripple a normal Titan, only to regenerate in moments, his rage seemingly fueling his healing. He fought with a terrifying, beautiful savagery, an artist of annihilation. Izuku was water. He was methodical, defensive, and precise. He would engage a Titan only when it posed a direct threat to human life. He would use the environment to his advantage, luring Titans into narrow streets where their movements were restricted. He fought not to kill, but to protect. His every move was a calculation. If I strike its leg here, it will fall away from the evacuation point. If I use a shield here, I can protect the supply runners. His goal wasn't to rack up a body count. It was to keep the number of human casualties at 0. At one point, their paths directly converged. Eren was locked in a brutal wrestling match with a powerful 14-meter Titan, his arms pinned, his torso exposed. He was so focused on ripping out the creature's throat with his teeth that he didn't see a smaller, faster 7-meter abnormal scuttling up behind him, its claws ready to tear into his nape. Izuku saw it. With a burst of speed he closed the distance. He didn't have time for a clean kill. So he did the one thing he was best at. He took the hit. He threw himself in the path of the abnormal, placing his own back between its claws and Eren's nape. The claws raked across his back, tearing deep gouges in his Titan flesh. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that made his human mind scream. But he held his ground. He grunted, steam pouring from his wounds, and spun around, catching the abnormal's arm. With a single, fluid motion, he dislocated its shoulder and elbow, then used his hardened fist to deliver a precise, devastating uppercut that obliterated its lower jaw and severed its nape from below. Eren, meanwhile, had finally overpowered his own opponent, crushing its head between his hands before ripping its nape out with his teeth. He stood up, panting, and turned to see Izuku's Titan standing behind him, steam billowing from the massive wounds on its back, which were already beginning to knit themselves closed. For a moment, the 2 rogue Titans stared at each other. Eren's Titan, the Berserker, tilted its head, a flicker of something other than pure rage in its fiery eyes. It was a flicker of confusion, perhaps even recognition. It had been saved. Izuku's Titan simply gave another one of its slow, deliberate nods before turning and leaping away, back to its self-appointed duty of protecting the city. The battle raged on, but the tide, almost imperceptibly, had begun to turn. The 2 rogue Titans, one a rampaging sword and the other a thinking shield, were systematically dismantling the Titan offensive. They were doing what the whole of the garrison could not. Word of their existence spread like wildfire among the beleaguered soldiers. They were called the Devils of Trost, the Rage Titan and the Guardian Titan. Hope, a feeling that had been extinguished hours ago, was rekindled. This hope reached the high command, where Commander Pixis, a man known for his eccentric but brilliant mind, was overseeing the failing defense. He listened to the frantic, unbelievable reports from his officers. 2 of them, sir! They only attack other Titans. One of them, it's a berserker, but the other, it's actively protecting my men. An idea, audacious and utterly insane, began to form in Pixis's mind. He looked at the giant boulder that had been part of a long-abandoned project to seal the breach in Shiganshina, a multi-ton monolith that no human technology could move. An abnormal Titan that obeys orders, or at least has a predictable, protective instinct. Pixis mused, a slow smile spreading across his face. Bring me Cadet Arlert. I hear he's a friend of the boy who was eaten just before the second rogue appeared. Armin, who had been rescued by Mikasa and was still in a state of deep shock, was brought before the commander. Trembling, he recounted the events on the rooftop, the death of his squad, and his theory that the rampaging Titan was, impossibly, Eren. The plan was formed. It was a desperate, 1-in-a-million gamble. Use Eren's Titan form, in all its raw, brute strength, to carry the boulder and seal the breach in the Trost Gate. It was humanity's last, best hope. The execution of the plan was a masterclass in coordinated chaos. The elite squads, led by Mikasa, were tasked with protecting Eren as he moved toward the boulder. The rest of the garrison was to act as bait, luring the remaining Titans away from the main path. But Pixis added one more element to the strategy. And the other one, he said, pointing to the distant, green-glowing figure that was methodically dispatching Titans near the evacuation boats. The Guardian, do not engage it. Let it do what it does best. It seems to have a vested interest in keeping us alive. It will be our unplanned, but perhaps most vital asset. Izuku, from his vantage point, saw the shift in human strategy. He saw the elite soldiers forming a protective cordon around Eren's Titan, who was now moving with a clear purpose towards the giant boulder. He saw the other soldiers deliberately drawing the Titans away. His analytical mind processed the information in a heartbeat. They're not trying to kill him. They're using him. The boulder, the breach, of course. It's a brilliant, desperate plan. My objective is now clear. Ensure Eren reaches that boulder. Clear his path. Run interference. I am the vanguard for humanity's last hope. His mission became singular. He no longer shadowed Eren. He raced ahead of him. He became a one-Titan demolition crew, a greenlit angel of death clearing the way. He moved with a speed and ferocity he hadn't displayed before, knowing that every second counted. He intercepted a group of 5 Titans that were about to converge on Eren's path. He didn't fight them one by one. He used his environment, stomping on the ground to create a fissure, then kicking the cornerstone of a large building, bringing it down on 2 of them. He dispatched the other 3 with a flurry of hardened kicks and punches, his movements a blur of green light and steaming gore. He sustained injuries, a deep gash in his leg, a chunk of his shoulder bitten off, but he ignored them, his regeneration already working to patch the wounds. He fought in perfect, unspoken tandem with Mikasa and her squad. He would draw the attention of the larger Titans, allowing the soldiers to zip in and take out the smaller, faster ones. He became their living, breathing decoy, their impenetrable shield. Finally, Eren reached the boulder. He struggled, his Titan form roaring in exertion as he lifted the colossal weight onto his shoulders. He began the slow, agonizing march toward the breach, every step a monumental effort. He was completely defenseless. This was the most dangerous part of the mission. The remaining Titans, drawn by the immense concentration of humans and the 2 shifters, began to converge on Eren's position. Protect him at all costs! Riko Brzezinska, one of the elite squad leaders, screamed. Izuku stood before the breach, his back to the struggling Eren, his face to the oncoming horde. He planted his feet, digging them into the stone. He slammed his fists together, and the glowing green armor flared to life, encasing his entire upper body in a crystalline shell. This was his last stand. He was the final line of defense. The gatekeeper. As the first Titan reached him, he didn't even bother with a punch. He simply held his ground, an immovable object against the tide of mindless destruction, a true symbol of hope standing resolute against a world of despair. The battle for Trost had reached its climax. The fate of humanity rested on the shoulders of one devil fueled by rage, and another shielded by a hero's heart.